And then you ask me that question, what do I think about the hire at that point in time? And I could give you a different type of answer.
So right now, you're just sort of...
I'm fine. Whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm like, whatever.
Whatever.
Let's just see what it is. I'm not like, this isn't Pat Riley coming. This is not Phil Jackson coming. You know, this is not, hell, it's not Rudy coming. It's not, it's just...
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
You just damned your team with faint praise, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that may be true, but I'm sure I'm not the only person.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I don't think you are, because this is a very, very difficult thing to be certain on. It is just such a huge gamble. The metaphor in my head is, say you've got a guy who was a waiter at a restaurant, then he went on to be a food critic, very respected, very good. He's suddenly hired to be the head chef, even though he's never worked in a kitchen before. Is that going to work? Maybe it becomes the hottest restaurant in town. Maybe it's closed in a month. There is literally no way to know. We can project, we can say, oh, JJ has this in his favor, is this against him? But we won't know until he actually does it, because he's never done it before. And that's where the Lakers have sort of made an interesting choice here. They've made this huge gamble on their 7th head coach in 13 years, 8th if you count that they had an interim head coach for 4 or 5 months. So this is a point where, as you guys just showed with all those head coaches that they fired, can they afford to be taking another gamble that in a year might completely blow up in their faces? They've done it. So it's pretty interesting that this hire and this chance has come at this time. And even JJ, if he was going to be honest with you, would be very surprised, because I want to underline what I'm talking about here with some of JJ's social media. There was a tweet, it was like a little bit more than a year ago. It was in response to the idea that JJ on his podcast had been rallying for Nikola Jokic instead of Joel Embiid for MVP. And this fan out there was like, hey, JJ, you know, Embiid made you a lot of money. You should be thankful. Without Embiid, you would just be coaching middle school right now. And JJ's response was amazing. He said, I'm actually coaching 8- and 9-year-olds right now. I'm hoping to move up to middle school in 3 to 5 years. That was a year and change ago. Oh. So, in fact, not 3 to 5 years, in a year and change, he is now the head coach of the Lakers, much less middle school. And it's jarring when you see the photos of him with the team he has coached in the past, because that's not LeBron James there. So again, how much of a gamble we are talking about has to be factored into any analysis of this hire.
Who's he talking to there?
I assume his son. I don't know.
Is that Austin Rivers or something?
Yeah. Okay, I continue to hear that this move is high risk but high reward. And I got to tell you, I get high risk because it's the highest risk. I don't get high reward because how can you know? This move is completely unknowable at this point because you have no track record to go on whatsoever. Even we just watched Joe Mazzulla win a championship at age 35. And you pointed out, well, they just picked like the 4th assistant down the row.
They did.
And said, here, you come up and do this out of emergency, obviously, because they had the Ime situation they had to remedy. And yet I look at Joe Mazzulla's background. For 2 years, he was the head coach at Fairmont State in West Virginia. And for a year, he was a couple of years, he was assistant on the Celtics G League team. So he had quite a background of growth and education, and he had been a head coach, and Fairmont State was 43-17 in the 2 years he coached. My point is, he'd done this before. He knew what it felt like to run a game, even a small college basketball game. JJ Redick only played basketball, and he was a pretty good player for a very long time. He was only a part-time starter. He started about half the games he played in the NBA. He started for the Clippers out here for Doc for 4 years, and then he went to Philly and did start for that year. So he has 5 years of starting experience. But was he considered as a player a dynamic leader as a player? No, not really. He was kind of a role player. He was a three-point shooter and a great three-point shooter, but not a team leader, not a point guard. So often you project the point guard to be a head coach. And yet, I look at what happened. You know, I keep hearing that JJ has, extraordinary basketball IQ. Well, I'll buy that from listening to their podcast. We know, we hear him talk on TV. But help me out here. higher IQ than Steve Nash? I doubt it, because Steve Nash it's way up there, trust me. And he was a back-to-back MVP and was a dynamic leader of the Phoenix Suns. And then what happened? When he got his first shot with no coaching experience, again, he got thrown into a really difficult situation with some really difficult to handle superstars that he was trying to juggle, and it flamed quickly out. So that would indicate, well, this might not work, but I have no idea. All I know is when we talk about building a staff, the truth is the lead assistant right now for the Los Angeles Lakers is LeBron James. And I keep harking back to Byron Scott. You had him on your podcast. We had him on this show, sitting right there in Rachel's seat. And what was the first thing he said about the Lakers situation? And he wasn't kidding. He's actually
tongue in cheek.
Yeah. But he was a little bitter about it because he doesn't like to see head coaches done wrong, and he thought Darvin Ham had been done wrong.
100%.
Right?
No, when you look at it now on its face,
yeah,
I kind of feel the same way.
Yeah.
Like when I look at it, you know, now that JJ is officially hired,
exactly.
You look at it and you go, wait a minute, man, you had a dude.
Wait a minute, man. I'm with you on that. But Byron was saying, well, LeBron should just go ahead and coach it. Well, I think he has a chance to be sort of a player coach because he and JJ obviously are close from the podcast and they have good connection on the podcast. I don't know how close they are off the field or off the floor, but at least they have a pretty deep connection. And I think they'll be able to communicate at a very high, quick level where LeBron can help him just the way a lead assistant would help him. And yet, the only issue I have with this whole process was, you know where I would be more impressed? Is if right away, if they had fired Darvin Ham one day and 2 days later, they had hired JJ Redick because they had it all set up and they said, that's our guy. We had targeted JJ Redick from the start. I'd say, whoa, I'd get goosebumps. I'd say, maybe they found Pat Riley. But as you kept pointing out about Pat Riley, he was an assistant coach for the Lakers. He knew the team from the inside out for, what was it, a couple of years? Yeah. Okay.
Not only that, you go back to not just an assistant coach, he was in the organization.
Yeah.
So he understood the Dr. Bus, and he just understood the organization, whether it was him calling the games with Chick Hearns or him on the bench.
Yeah, okay. So I got to know Pat a little bit in his first 2 or 3 years with the Lakers, and I was around him a lot in media situations. Trust me, he was a tough guy. He had powerful charisma where the locker room listened to him. They already knew him, but he obviously inherited an all-time great team. We get that. But he was commanding from day one. I don't know if JJ's commanding or not because we've never seen him in this situation. I have no idea. Maybe you would have some feel for it, but can he walk in and just take a locker room over? Again, as a player, he wasn't Doc Rivers when he played. He came straight from sort of playing to coaching. He was a leader of the team. And I looked down Steve Nash,
Steve Kerr.
Steve Kerr. I covered those Bulls. Steve Kerr was kind of the unofficial spokesman for the team. When we needed a quote, when we needed it put into perspective, we went to Steve Kerr. Because Michael could be a little distant and difficult with the media where he just didn't want to get involved. Okay, but Steve Kerr had leadership. You could just see it, where everybody looked up to Steve Kerr, and he was a starter for that team, okay? And then Mark Jackson, he was the leader of those Knicks teams that he played for, and when he stepped in, he took over.
Pacers, Knicks, all those type of teams.
Yeah, okay. So Dave McMenamin he said this several times. He said that from the start, their list was this. It was Jason Kidd, Ty Lue, and JJ Redick. And I'm like, when I look at that list, I think it's like the equivalent of LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and Max Christie. You know, like right? That's kind of the order, the pecking order. Then we're down to Max Christie as a potential head coach, right? Is JJ Redick? Well, they weren't going to get Jason Kidd, right? They weren't going to get Ty Lue because they had some bad blood history, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then they interviewed JJ Redick. And then all of a sudden, we've talked this to death, and I don't want to beat the dead horse of Dan Hurley, but Dan Hurley just swoops in, kaboom, and all of a sudden they say, yes, we'll take you, and we will offer you 6 years, $70 million. And then you're saying, well, that's not nearly enough. And I'm saying, for Dan Hurley, that's a lot of money because there's some X factor there, whether he can translate into pro basketball,
No, it's
right?
not enough. Look, it wasn't enough. If they want